Most people never actually compare these three jackets side by side because the industry has quietly sorted them into three separate shelves in your mind. Levi's occupies the fashion heritage shelf. Wrangler occupies the rodeo and ranch shelf. Lee occupies the workwear you buy at the hardware store shelf. That sorting was not an accident. It was built through decades of advertising aimed at different customers, which means almost nobody ever holds all three jackets at the same time and asks the only question that actually matters. Which one is built to last the longest for the money you are handing over? When you strip away 70 years of marketing and look only at the stitching, the denim weight, and the hardware, some uncomfortable truths surface about which brand has been coasting on its reputation. Levi Strauss & Company was founded in San Francisco in 1853, making it the oldest of the three by a wide margin. The jacket most people picture is the trucker jacket, and its current shape traces back to a 1962 redesign historians call the Type 3. Two earlier versions came before it. The first, introduced in 1905, had a single chest pocket and a cinchback waist borrowed from riding jackets. The second, from 1953, added a second chest pocket. The Type 3 replaced the curved chest seams with two straight vertical darts, which is why old-timers can spot the difference across a room. That redesign was not cosmetic. The vertical darts allow the jacket to follow the shape of the body without a separate lining, which is part of why this jacket has stayed in continuous production for over 60 years without another major redesign. The Type 3 does several things honestly well. The denim runs about 13 ounces per square yard, heavy enough to hold its shape for years without turning limp. And the copper rivets at the base of the front pockets are direct descendants of that 1873 patent. The stitching on the shoulder yoke uses a triple needle construction, 3 parallel lines of thread rather than one, which spreads the load across more thread and resists blowing out at the seam. This is a jacket built by a company that has had over a century to refine one pattern, and it shows in the way the denim breaks in around the elbows rather than cracking. The educational concept worth understanding here is sanforization, a shrink-resistant treatment developed in the 1930s that most modern denim now uses before the fabric is cut. Before this treatment became standard, raw denim could shrink noticeably after the first wash, sometimes 10% in length. Levi's still sells a small line of unsanforized raw denim jackets aimed at denim enthusiasts, and a shopper who does not check the label can buy, expecting a large and end up closer to a medium after the first hot wash. That is not a defect, but it is a real problem for someone who simply wanted a reliable, ready-to-wear jacket. Here is the central problem with the Levi's jacket for most everyday buyers. The retail price on the standard Type 3 has climbed well past what the construction alone would justify, often landing between $90 and $140 depending on wash and finish, substantially higher than either of the other two brands for what is, underneath the branding, a comparable amount of denim and thread. A large share of that price is the heritage itself. That heritage is real, but it is not stitching, and a portion of every dollar spent goes toward decades of brand marketing rather than the jacket in your hands. Lee was founded in 1889 by Henry David Lee in Salina, Kansas, originally selling work clothes and oil to farmers and railroad workers. Lee's most recognizable jacket is the 101 Rider, sometimes called the Storm Rider, introduced in the 1930s with a blanket lining sewn into the body for cold weather work. This is the jacket most associated with railroad crews and highway construction workers through the mid-20th century, and it has quietly remained in production for close to 90 years. What Lee does genuinely well is the blanket-lined winter version, which very few other mainstream denim jackets attempt. Where Levi's and Wrangler mostly stick to unlined denim, Lee added an insulating lining across the chest and back, turning a work jacket into something wearable through a Kansas winter on a loading dock. The hardware also uses a heavier gauge snap than the other two brands, more resistant to bending under years of daily wear. The concept worth understanding before Lee's problem is fabric density, the same ounces per square yard measurement used above. Heavier denim is not automatically better. It resists abrasion longer, but breathes less, holds more moisture, and dries slower after a wash. A jacket built at 14 or 15 ounces will likely outlast one built at 11 ounces in raw fabric wear, but it will also be stiffer and warmer. Weight has to match how the jacket is actually worn. The central problem with the modern Lee jacket is a documented shift in stitch density compared with the vintage 101 riders collectors still seek out. Multiple second-hand denim resellers and repair shops have documented that older Lee jackets used a noticeably tighter stitch count per inch on the felled seams than versions currently sold in most department stores. Fewer stitches per inch means each thread bears more strain before the seam gives way. This is not a claim of malicious corner cutting. It reflects a broader, well-documented shift across the entire denim industry toward faster, lower-cost manufacturing. And Lee's current retail line shows that shift more visibly than its own vintage jackets did. Wrangler is the youngest of the three, founded in 1947 as a division of Bluebell Incorporated, built from the start around a specific customer: professional rodeo riders. The company hired a tailor named Bernard Lichtenstein, known as Rodeo Ben, who had already been custom-making jackets for working cowboys for years. His input-shaped features still on Wrangler jackets today, including the pointed, sawtooth-shaped snap pockets, designed so a rider's hand could find the opening by feel while on horseback without looking down. What Wrangler does genuinely well is build a jacket around movement rather than a fixed silhouette. The armholes and shoulder seams sit slightly higher and more open, tracing directly back to rodeo use, where a rider needs to raise an arm overhead without the jacket pulling across the back. The denim runs close to 12.5 ounces, slightly lighter than Lee's heaviest offering, but reinforced at every major stress point with a bar tack, a small dense cluster of zigzag stitches sewn on top of a seam intersection, usually at pocket corners and the base of the collar. A bar tack works like a tiny bracket made of thread, concentrating strength exactly where a seam is most likely to rip under sudden strain. The concept worth understanding here is the difference between reinforcement placed for appearance and reinforcement placed for function. Some jackets add rivets or extra stitching purely because customers expect to see them, a visual signal of ruggedness rather than a load-bearing necessity. Wrangler's bar tacks sit at the exact points denim historians and repair shops consistently identify as the first places any jacket fails, meaning the reinforcement is doing real structural work. This is worth checking on any jacket before buying it, simply by looking at where the extra stitching actually sits. If there is a problem with the Wrangler jacket, it shows up in the finishing details rather than the core construction. The interior collar lining on many current retail models uses a lighter cotton blend that thins faster than the heavier flannel linings Wrangler used decades ago, and the exterior wash finishes lean more heavily on chemical stonewashing, which can leave the surface slightly more prone to uneven fading around the shoulders after repeated washing. It is cosmetic rather than structural, but the jacket may not look as sharp in year 5 even if it still functions perfectly. Placed side by side, 6 measurable points separate these jackets clearly. On denim weight, Lee's blanket-lined version runs heaviest at roughly 14 to 15 ounces, Levi's sits around 13 ounces, and Wrangler runs lightest at roughly 12.5 ounces. On seam reinforcement at high stress points, Wrangler's bar tack placement is the most consistently functional. On retail price, Wrangler is typically least expensive, often $30 to $50 below a comparable Levi's Type 3. On stitch density along major seams, Levi's triple needle construction and older Lee vintage models tie for tightest, with current Lee retail stock trailing behind both. On cold weather function, Lee's blanket lining stands alone. On range of motion in the shoulders and arms, Wrangler's rodeo-derived cutout performs the other two. The clear winner, weighing cost against genuine functional construction rather than brand recognition, is Wrangler, and that surprises most people specifically because Wrangler carries the least prestige of the three names. But prestige was never one of the 6 measurable points. What decided this comparison was that Wrangler delivers the most functionally reinforced jacket, built around real stress points rather than visual signals of toughness, at consistently the lowest price of the 3. Winning on price alone would not be meaningful if the construction were weaker. Winning on construction alone would not matter much if the price made it a poor value. Wrangler's advantage comes from combining both, and that combination is worth more to a daily wear jacket than either Lee's insulated lining or Levi's historical pedigree, unless your specific situation calls for one of those specialized strengths. That said, no single winner fits every situation equally. Buy the Levi's if you want a jacket built around one continuously refined pattern with over 60 years of consistency, and you are comfortable paying a premium for that continuity and a silhouette that has aged well since the 1960s. Buy the Lee if you spend real time outdoors in genuinely cold conditions, where the blanket lining provides warmth neither other brand offers in their standard jacket, and where slightly looser modern stitching matters less than the insulation itself. Buy the Wrangler if you want the most functional reinforcement for the lowest price, particularly for regular daily use with real physical movement involved, whether that is yard work, driving, or simply an active daily routine where a jacket needs to move with you rather than against you. What this comparison ultimately reveals is that the price tag on a denim jacket often reflects the story a company has told about itself for the better part of a century, and that story is not the same thing as the thread holding the pockets on. The next time you're standing in front of a rack of jackets that all look roughly similar, run your fingers along the seams at the pocket corners and the collar before you check the price tag, because that is where 70 years of construction decisions actually live, whether or not the label ever mentions them. If you want to check your own jacket against what we found here, look at the stitching around your own front pockets tonight, and you will likely be able to tell within 30 seconds which of these three companies built it.